Everyone. Welcome to HOA Fight Club. I'm Raylene Schifano. First, I want to start with the fact that I haven't been on in a few months, and I want to apologize. I am in the middle of a lot of craziness in my life as a properties director for a commercial business. I am responsible for a major business, and so I have been really distracted this year trying to protect the property rights of this business, and it's really complicated and crazy. That'll probably come out in the future, what happened with this. And I just wanted to kind of go over with my followers some things that I've learned along the way in this past couple of years that I've been dealing with this business commercial park, and why I feel I've been speaking it publicly in city council, and a lot of you have asked why I do things in city council and how does the city have anything to do with the HOA? Because most of the times they don't. But what people learn and what I've learned this year is that the public documents, the CCNRs are recorded. That's one thing, but there's maps and there's annexations and there's subdivisions and there's parking and easements, and there's so much more to HOA than just the actual HOA CCNRs. So most of you that know me know when I take on a person and try to help them, the first thing I do is look up the public records. I feel the public records speak volumes, that they tell us everything about our property that we should know. They list, usually most CCNRs have to be recorded, so they do have the recorded CCNRs. There's a lot of times that I see that CCNRs have been amended by the association, but they're not actually recorded. There's no recording numbers on them, or the association is using a non-recorded set of CCNRs. There's map defected. Now that I've been educated quite a bit this last couple of years, you find out that there's final maps and there's all these processes and there's all these votes that have to take. And so what I've done this last year is really spent a deep dive in investigating public records in the county that I'm in, and the city records and why things were done. I've read through all the HOA board meetings, for there's a master association and a sub association, and it just gets very, very complicated when you're into this. But I think that for my nonprofit part of it, for the HOA Fight Club part of it, my goal is to educate. I don't give legal advice. I give what life lessons have taught me. And so I want to talk to you about that, something that happens when you start asking questions to your HOA board. And in my case, I also had the city officials that are supposed to be safeguarding the land use and property rights use. And so when you start taking the emotion out of it. Now, of course, the owners of the company, of the land, are very emotional about this because it does affect their property rights. And so when you start looking into the public records and you go through the records and you start just asking non-emotional questions, why does this map not add up to this? Are these CCNRs recorded here, but this is recorded there? When you start asking those questions, those are questions that actually the city has to be able to answer. They had to give the association the right to do business in their city, and they had to have a plan. And in that plan, the city is responsible for checking off the list for the plan to give approvals for annexations and subdivisions and land use. And so in my case, it came down to, there's a lot of, maps, and well, not a lot of maps. There's only 3 maps, but the maps don't match up to the CCNRs, and the CCNRs didn't match up to the maps and what's being quoted and what's being enforced. And of course, through litigation, all of this stuff has come out. But I think that you feel that you become the problem. So when you start speaking up, and this is what is the pattern that I see, is you do become the problem. You become labeled difficult, obstructive, a troublemaker, sometimes even criminal. They're accusing you of the crime of exposing what has been hidden for years. Now, whether the professionals knew that this was hidden or not hidden, that can all be debated later, but it has not been disclosed, and the documents that I have show that the disclosure was not, it was acknowledged. It was actually seen, and they took actions after they saw the documents that probably shouldn't have been done. Well, in my opinion, they shouldn't have been done. There should have been a vote. There should always be a vote. The state code, in most states have 67% to amend governing documents. So when you add properties and take properties away and put easements on, you have to have those votes, anything that affects the owners. If a association has 3,000 properties, and then they're going to add another 2,000 properties. That adds another big hurdle for homeowners to come up with for their voting. So, there's all these things, but my thing was that I was being treated, and the owners were being treated as if we're the problem. And at first we were ignored by the HOA. Then when you become, loud, now you become the problem. Now we've got to enforce things on you. Now we've got to find a way to lean on you for those any violations we can find. And nobody stops to look at the documents because it's HOA. And so my concern, I think, with the whole process of HOA is that we're always going to have HOAs. There's at least condominium associations. If you're sharing walls and common areas, then there has to be some sort of an agreement to maintain those common areas. But what most people realize that some places don't have any common areas, and the place that I'm at doesn't have any common areas. And it's just been kind of assumed that everything was done legally. And then when it was exposed that potentially it wasn't, and that things didn't get followed the way the process demands that it's followed, that now I'm the problem. So I have tried to go to the city, I've tried to go to everybody, and alert people and ask questions. You think that these people are there to protect us, especially the boards. I did go to, the master board meetings and the subdivision board meetings, and I've tried to speak to them before they even, got into litigation, that, we should take a step back. We should make sure that, we're looking at everything. I have to question the professionals. I mean, most of you that know me, that, in my advocation and my education, I've learned that the professionals are not there to protect our property rights. They're there to protect their bottom dollars. They're for-profit corporations. They give the boards a lot of power. If you start to speak up, then they just automatically turn you over to the attorney, which costs the association money. Then it costs you money. And then the neighbors think that you're a problem because it's costing everybody money. And that's just, it's so, the system is not protecting our property rights. I have no problem with paying assessments for a common area, but if there's no proof of that common area existing, and everybody kind of takes advantage of that but doesn't speak up, I always say my slogan is speaking up matters. And I think that for the new year, you have to speak up. The problem with speaking up in HOA is we become a target, and we become the ones that get punished for it. So, people asked, they want you to suffer. They want you to suffer because you're exposing a secret that they don't want exposed. And, as I understand somebody trying to protect themselves, when it becomes a professional, when does their duty to expose the cover up, or the things that are not, they don't coincide, they're defective, this should be this way, but it's not, it's this way, and yet nobody is concerned about that. And I think that bothers me, that people are not concerned. The city's not concerned with the documents lining up, and the HOA, of course, is denying everything. My thing is always delay, deny, deflect. And how do we as property owners protect our constitutional rights? Because as we signed a contract saying that we are going to follow these CC&Rs and we're going to do what they say, when you find out that the CC&Rs didn't apply, or that they don't apply in a certain way, or they were misinterpreted by the, professionals all along, now that damage, who's going to pay for that? It hurts everyone when these decisions are made to defend something that they didn't check the records for in the first place. If there's a defective final map, that map should have been the first red flag to every professional that is involved, that sees that map. And my concern is that nobody looked for the map, and not the property manager doesn't look at the map. They couldn't identify the final map. I've done a lot of investigating. That is my job. My job is to maintain the records of the corporation. It is to investigate every public record that has to do with our property. We own, quite a bit of property here. So it's very important that these owners are protected. There's a lot more to the story, but that will come out in the future. But what my thing for the end of the year is, you need to learn your documents. You need to learn your final maps, your annexations, making sure that your property is recorded correctly, is actually in an HOA. If you think that there's something wrong, you should, question that. Now, in questioning that, should we be silenced because of, threats of litigation or being in litigation or being sued for something that you lawfully had a right to do, but they all accused you of a crime that you didn't commit? So this is why due process has always mattered to me. There was no hearings, there was no due process prior to a lawsuit and litigation to be commenced in the first place. And the owners have all been kept away from each other. We don't, we've called special meetings and the professionals cancel those because we're in litigation. But litigation should never mean that the owners cannot get together and discuss what's going on in their community, because things might have been able to be solved if the owners could have talked about it. And here in a commercial property, most of the owners are out of state or gone, or, it's crazy. It's kind of crazy because as a director for the corporation under a commercial business, they were trying to keep me from coming to meetings. And of course, I had to come home from traveling abroad. I was living in Bangkok at the time and had to come home so I could just attend board meetings. And so it's been a very stressful year. But at the end of the year, I think that we all should understand that HOAs are supposed to be there to protect our biggest investment. And this is your biggest investment. And I know is, the business that I'm in, it is our biggest investment. And so we have to defend our rights, and we shouldn't be threatened when we speak up and when we question things. And that's my thing with the government. If we're going to give these attorneys and property managers such, control over our private property rights, don't you think we should have some oversight over those professionals and that they should be held accountable for the things that they do? I shouldn't have to take the professionals to civil court to get them to follow the CC&Rs, to make sure that documents are valid. In this state, there's an ombudsman, but there's no validation of documents. They don't validate anything. And so this is when our taxpayer dollars, and yes, HOA fees are taxpayer. They are taxes. They are for utilities. They are for maintenance. They are for landscaping. They are for, in our case, ombudsman fees. We have paid those for years. And yet the ombudsman, when we complained about election interference, didn't take our complaint seriously. And so it's always just kind of, shuffled under a carpet and everybody just doesn't look at it. Know your documents, keep speaking up, keep fighting. Know I'm out there. I do help a lot of people daily. The nonprofit is up and running. It's just been very quiet because, of course, I have been threatened and I don't want to put anybody in jeopardy. My story is out there. I mean, I have been very public about my story. You can watch my story if you know where I'm at, and you can watch the city council meeting minutes to know what I fight for the business that I work for, that I'm a director for. And then I do have in my nonprofit HOA Fight Club, and HOA United works very hard at legislation. We are in the room. I work a lot with the foreclosure prevention legislation. So if that's something that you haven't thought about, go talk to your legislators that write the foreclosure prevention laws. I have to thank Senator Orwell from Washington State. She's been amazing at understanding the needs for HOA homeowners' rights in foreclosure due to their HOAs, and the fact that we have seniors and veterans and that need protections, and the disabled that need protections that we don't have in many of these states. And I think that we need to have a lot of oversight and governance, which has to be for the professionals. I mean, the board members and the homeowners are all uneducated volunteers, and we should understand that. So as I always say, speaking up matters. I'm trying to speak up. I apologize for my silence, but it was only to protect both my nonprofit and my commercial business that I work for, and try to protect every day. I didn't want to jeopardize anything. And at the end of the day, everything I say is my opinion. I am not giving legal advice. I have an amazing attorney that I work with that protects my commercial business, and he has been amazing. And so it is good when you finally do find an honest attorney, but there's not a lot of them out there. So I understand, but speaking up does matter, and keep it up. All right, you guys, I'll see you on the next one.